So after the success of the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering crossover and the disappointment of the Spider-Man set and the seeming disappointment of the upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle set, let's take a look inside of the upcoming Avatar Last Airbender crossover set and see if it's more of a Final Fantasy crossover winning set or if it's one of those other sets that is not going to fare as well. Let's get into it. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am a massive fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think it's one of the best series ever written. I grew up watching it. I have the complete series, and I also have Korra, which I have soured a little bit on as I've grown a little older. But there's still things to love about Korra, and I of course love Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is our main focus of conversation for this video. I grew up playing a lot of Magic: The Gathering. My dad paid a pro Magic the Gathering player to tutor me to play professionally at a young age of 10, which is pretty crazy. And on top of that, I make my own card games. I run Vindicated, which is a card gaming publishing and designing company, and we make all sorts of fun stuff, so be sure to check that out. But as far as this set goes, let's take a look into mechanics and let's talk about it from, an intuition point of view, from how easy it is grokkable, how easy it is to play, how fun they seem, and how much it captures the flavor and the story of Avatar, since that's important to me as well. And important to the players, of course. Let's dive in. All right, so I have the Magic the Gathering article pulled up here, which discusses the different mechanics that you can expect in the Avatar Last Airbender set. With this one, the very first one is fire bending. So in Avatar Last Airbender, there are four elements. You have fire, wind, water, and earth, and they each have their own bending techniques. Now, at first, I was thinking from a game design perspective, you would want the bending to have a similarity between the different types of bending. That way, whenever you learn basically that part of the mechanic as a player, you could intuitively jump into any of these. But what you'll see in this video is that for the different mechanics for bending, they decided to go a very different route for each of the elements. And that sort of surprised me at first, but having thought a little bit more on that, I could see that being the right decision because each type of bending is based off of a different martial arts style, different philosophy, and a different way that they are used within the show. So it makes sense that they wanted the freedom to be able to tackle these mechanics from many different perspectives. So first up is firebending, which has a variable number beside it. So in this case, it's firebending 1. Whenever this creature attacks, add 1 fire mana. This mana lasts until end of combat. So essentially how this plays is you'll want to use this for combat tricks. You won't be able to hold on to this fire mana like after combat. You won't be able to use it during your main phases. So in some ways that will be unintuitive for players. However, this is a really fun design space because we haven't really seen anything quite like this before. We've seen some one-off cards of different creatures throughout Magic's history that whenever they attack, they add some mana to your mana pool, but that's very sparingly. And as a mechanic with a set built around it, this is the first time we've seen this, and it's a pretty cool thing. I think that as long as it's built to work, which it seems like they're doing a good job with, you can make this a really fun, exciting mechanic. And of course, Red, loves attacking, but this is a fun way to sort of give them something a little bit more to do with that. It's a different angle and a different perspective. And Red is the color of fast mana, temporary mana, and so we get to see that within firebending. So I think this is a flavor hit. I think the only miss on this is it could be maybe slightly confusing for people, but really just say like, hey, whenever you firebend, you get mana during your combat. You can use it then, So just be sure to be doing that. So, and I mean specifically combat when they attack, so it does keep them aggressive. But I think that's overall a really solid mechanic, and I'd say it's mostly a hit. So really good job there. Next up, we have airbending. So airbending is essentially, let's see, whenever Appa enters, airbend any number of other target non-land permanents you control. I do believe for airbending, it's always going to be non-land permanents because they don't want you to be able to disrupt your opponent's lands. That leads to bad gameplay. So whenever you airbend a non-land permanent, it will exile that permanent, and then its owner may pay two to play it rather than playing its mana cost. So essentially, if you airbend one of your own cards or airbend one of your opponents, which lends itself to some of the flexibility of this mechanic, so you could use this as a means to remove your stuff to then have it enter back for interplay abilities, or you can do it to your opponent so you can remove blockers or pesky artifacts or enchantments that's getting in your way. So I think overall Airbend is I think that's very flavorful for the show because it's all about being very like pushing things away and being able to create little air bubbles and air shields and redirecting the flow of what's going on. And this is also a pretty unique take as far as mechanics we see in Magic the Gathering. I mean, we see flicker mechanics where it will exile something and instantly bring it back, and then there's like the slower version of that where it will remove it and then bring it back at the end of turn. But having it so it's exiled and then you have to pay two to bring it back, whenever you want, whenever you can play it, I think it gives itself a very different feeling. I think people will be surprised. To me, this is one of those sleeper mechanics. I think that this one may not sound interesting to most people. Just kind of like airbending kind of seems like the least fun for a lot of people on the surface level. I think when you ask people what kind of bending they prefer, I think airbending isn't like the most exciting for people, but I think when you really dive into it, it's actually a lot better, a lot more fun, and a lot cooler than what you might suspect. So I think that this one is a really solid one. I kind of hope that they have a player aid card, which I assume they probably would, where you can put it on your airbend cards from exile, and it will remind you that you can pay two to bring them back. Now, I know that there may be some concern that you may forget about them, but I think having them still in play, especially if there's a player aid, but having them still in play, like people don't like losing their cards. Like they don't like their fun monsters being removed from the game. So having the chance to be able to bring them back, I think players will remember that. Overall, I think this is a really solid mechanic, and I would say that this is on par with the firebending mechanic in my opinion. Maybe slightly below, but it's pretty close. Next up, we have waterbending, which in this case we have the North Pole Patrol. Fun name. Two colorless, one blue for 2/3. You can tap them to untap another target permanent you control. And you can waterbend 3 and tap. So it says tap target creature and opponent controls. While paying a waterbend cost, you can put your artifacts and creatures to help. Uh, you can tap your artifacts and creatures to help. Each one pays for one colorless. So essentially, what that does is it's like a convoke-esque ability where you can use your creatures and your artifacts. You can tap them to help pay the cost. So you're not having to pay 3 and tap. You can, it's an option, but you can also reduce that cost. I think that this one's interesting because it's definitely very like blue feeling. I think a lot of this one is the most complicated one in my opinion so far for what we got in. It might even just be the most complicated mechanic in this set. I I think it feels a little weird. Now, when it comes to creatures or artifacts being able to help pay the cost from a flavor perspective, I mean, we can see it in this picture here. It's sort of like with waterbending. The idea is you're using creatures, you have help, you're all in this together, and so you're able to waterbend together to do things. I know that there's a lot of people that find it a little suspect that the artifacts can help pay for too. I think it is a bit of a stretch, but maybe not quite as much of a stretch as most people think. Uh, Waterbending is the main bending that uses other items and its surroundings to help it. People can pull water from the air, can pull water from plants, can have water bending scrolls. The water attached like through the thing that Katara carries. It like requires objects and life. It basically requires life and objects more than the other things. So like for firebending, it uses your inner chi and you generate fire from that, and you can have that fire generated without needing to have like a fireplace or something, unless you're that terrible movie that we're not going to talk about. But you can generate the fire from your own chi. And with airbending, you're going to have access to air that's around you. And earthbending, you almost always have access to earth unless you're very specifically removed from it. So I think water bending is interesting because it's the one that requires people to either carry items to help them the most with having access to water, because it's the element that you may most likely be in danger of not having access to, with the exception of living things such as plants and people. If you want to get dark with the blood bending, so I think that it is a stretch, but I think like knowing the full context of the lore of Atla, I think it works. So overall, I would say that this could be a fun mechanic. This could play very well. I think it's a little. I think currently it's ranked the order that we've seen it. I think firebending is the coolest one mechanically. Now, I mean, granted, with waterbending, you can do a lot more with this than just simply adding mana during your combat step. And to be honest, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit more of a control player, so maybe I wouldn't even find firebending as fun. But I just think it's so different for what we see in Magic, and I think it's so on point with the flavor of firebending that I just think that that's the one I'm most excited about in terms of just being a game designer that gets to see how these mechanics come together and bring out this world of Avatar. Next up, we have Earthbending. So with this one, we have the good old Badger Moles. You gotta love the Badger Moles. So it's 4 colorless and 1 green for a 4/4 Badger Mole. When this creature enters Earthbend 2, so it says target land you control becomes a 0/0 creature with haste that's still a land. Put 2+1/+1 counters on it. When it dies or is exiled, return it to the battlefield tapped. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have trample. Okay, so obviously that's going to give your lands trample. Earthbending is about animating the lands, which make a lot of sense. It's kind of hard to think of an earthbending mechanic that would not use lands in some way, because that just seems so intrinsic to that. And for it to be in the green mana color pie, it totally makes sense. So with Earthbend, I think I like this one more than waterbending, but less than the other two. I think that this one is fun. I think new players will actually enjoy this. I mean, a lot of your casual players, I think, are more Timmy oriented. I think they're gonna love Toph. I think they're gonna love playing green, and I think they're gonna love turning their forests and mountains into lands to beat up their opponents with. And the fact that you get to return the lands back to play whenever they die, I think is definitely a positive, because if you just had them where they died, it would be such a that would be such a feels bad. It would be horrible. I think casual players would hate it. But they did fix that by adding the stipulation that returns to the battlefield tapped. I do think it may be a little confusing for some people, but I think it's less confusing than waterbending. So I think overall this is a win. I do think it's a little, again, I was kind of put off at first at how varied these different bending styles are, because they are so different from each other. But I do think it's fun that we get to really see the flavor of each bending kind of play out. And I think the earth bending one's pretty solid. So I would give this a pretty high rating. Um, I think it's pretty good. So next up, we have double faced sagas. So we have the rise of Sozin. So Sozin, the episode with him is really cool. With him and Roku, we have the saga, which is a type of enchantment that essentially tells a story. It costs 6 mana, 4 colors, and 2 of it's black. On chapter 1, it destroys all creatures, so it's a board wipe for 6 mana. And then during the next turn, you get to choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name, and exile them. Then that player shuffles. And then for chapter 3, exile the saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. So I think that does a really great job of showing the rise of Sozin as he goes from being this sort of normal everyday guy to having to step into the shoes of being Fire Lord, and then seeing this potential for greatness and becoming this awful person and destroying everything around him, and then being on the search for Roku to destroy him. And then whenever he transforms, we have Fire Lord Sozin, which is a 5/5 creature with Menace, Firebending 3. And whenever Fire Lord Sozin deals combat damage to a player, you may pay X. When you do, put any number of target cards with the total mana cost of X or less from the player's graveyard on the battlefield under your control. So didn't know he was in the necromancy, but we can make this work. Overall, the transforming sagas I think are awesome. I think the saga itself is pretty flavorful and the art's amazing. I think the idea of having sagas is great for Avatar: Last Airbender. Of course, we've been seeing sagas a lot in Magic the Gathering, but I'm not going to complain. I think that when sagas were introduced, it was one of the coolest things ever, and I think that obviously as we keep seeing them, it's gonna kind of wear down how cool they are in terms of that specialty. But I can totally understand it because I think it's such a smart design, and I think that Wizards really knocked it out of the park whenever they made them. So I think this is a nice inclusion to the set, especially for Avatar. Next up, we have lessons. It says opportunities to grow are all around us, whether that's through our experiences, our companions, or even our failures. And sometimes lessons are conveniently printed on cards we can just throw into our decks. So this one's interesting because this is maybe the first time Magic the Gathering has decided to throw in like a subcategory on their cards for like a main mechanic in a set and it not do anything on its own. Now we have been seeing this for some of the subtypes for lands. We saw it in one of the Ravnica sets. They had the gate cards, which was like a subtype for your lands, and then so certain cards cared about having gates. And then we saw that as recently as the space set that I can't think of the name of, where they had the planet cards, and then for Final Fantasy we had the set with towns, and so you could have some cards care about towns, and that's a fun thing to do. So with this, we have Aang's Journey, which this is a lesson. Now there is a mechanic that goes with lessons, which is called Learn, and that was a part of a set that came out a handful of years ago, which they're returning to next year. But as far as in this set, this essentially lesson is just a subtype, and some cards are going to care about you having lessons like in your graveyard or playing a lesson card. For example, this says lesson is a returning subtype that appears on some instances and for instance in sorceries. Lessons don't lesson doesn't inherently have any special meaning. It's there so other cards can find it and give it meaning, which is really sort of poetic if you think about it. Oh, hello, Aang. So Aang is a 4-cost 3/2 flyer. When Aang enters, airbend up to one other non-land permanent, and then whenever you cast a lesson spell, Aang gains lifelink until the end of turn. So with him, you're definitely going to want to be playing lesson cards so you can keep giving him lifelink, swinging in the air for 3 and healing 3 while you're doing it. So I would say having lessons honestly is a perfect flavor fit for Avatar: Last Airbender, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them having sort of these like identifying mechanics for them to deal with. It doesn't add really like any baggage for the players. I think the bending styles are kind of on the heavier end mechanically, so to have something like lesson to balance it out, I think is needed and very fitting for this set, and it could possibly tie into the new Strixhaven set coming out next year. Similarly, we have exhaust, which is another mechanic that is a bit easier to digest. Essentially, we have the Hog Monkey, which is a 3-cost 3/2. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it gains menace until the end of turn. And then you can pay 5 colorless to put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. Activate each exhaust ability only once. So this reminds me a bit of Monstrous from the Theros block, but this has a bit more utility to it. And essentially, for players that don't know, if you activate the exhaust mechanic and then this card gets airbended and then you return it or gets bounced and you play it again, you can use that exhaust again. Essentially, in most cases, if you have those counters on the card, it serves as a reminder that you've already used the exhaust ability. So that's something very intentional the game designers are doing. That way it's sort of like a memory placement for you, so you don't have to have that memory overload. You get this visually see it on your card. As far as a mechanic goes, I don't really love the name exhaust. I know it premiered in Ether Drift, so it sort of had the dual meaning of like exhausting while driving like your cars or whatever, like with the exhaust. But to me, like exhaust sort of means tapped. So I just think like exhaust tap, because a lot of no other card games use the terminology tap. So a lot of them use things like exhaust, and so I'm not a huge fan of the word. And I don't when I think Avatar: The Last Airbender, I'll think of firebending, I'll think of lessons. I don't think of exhaust. So to me, I'm not very excited about this mechanic in general. Is it to me? It's like it's not a bad mechanic though. It's I don't know. I think I would rather have something a little different, but I don't think it's awful by any means. I mean, it's a solid mechanic, and you need some of the more simple ones. Speaking of which, we have clues, which are deciduous at this point, I believe, in Magic the Gathering, so they just come up very frequently. Not guaranteed every set, but pretty frequently. And so with that, let's see, it says the gang isn't always the most subtle, and if you look closely, you can usually find signs of their adventures. The clues are everywhere. So we have Azula on the hunt. This is one of many Azula cards in the game. We have 4 costs for 4/3, Firebending 2. Whenever Azula attacks, you lose 1 life and create a clue token. So essentially, with this, clues are artifacts. You can pay 2, sacrifice, and draw a card. Very solid mechanic, very flavorful, very fun. I think that it's a good inclusion in the set. So I'm excited to see that here. We also have shrines. The final returning subtype to talk about here is shrine, an enchantment type that encourages you to control a lot of them. So, as an example, with the Southern Air Temple, this costs 4 legendary enchantment shrine. Whenever Southern Air Temple enters, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of shrines you control. Whenever another shrine you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So one thing I love about that is you don't have to feel bad about like when you play the shrine. You can just kind of play it as soon as you want to, and you get to benefit from it. And as it says, you get a bigger benefit whenever you play more shrines. Funny enough, this is a mechanic that premiered in the original Kamigawa block, which I played during that set. Was kind of awful to play in, if I'm being honest. Like if you actually played through that set when it came out, it was not a fun set. It had a lot of fun cards. Shout out to my homeboy Toshiro and Umazawa's Jit, but that was not a fun set to play limited. I'll tell you that. And this Avatar set's gonna be a lot better. So looking at these, I think overall these are fun mechanics. I think it's a very solid hit. I think this is way more in line with something like Final Fantasy. I think the IP fits better like Final Fantasy does. I love that we're not seeing New York or spandex, so I think that's a positive. But again, that ship's already been sailed with Magic the Gathering, so it's just kind of like what we're gonna have to deal with as Magic the Gathering players. But as far as this set in particular, I think this is a win. I think that, looking at some of the other cards, I think it's a solid set. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play in limited. I'm looking at playing this casually and building some fun, flavorful decks that kind of play out some of, with some of our favorite characters from the show and playing out some of those stories. I would say my least favorite in this grouping is exhaust, which mechanically is probably not the worst mechanic here, but I think as far as like fitting the avatar flavor, and counting that and weighing that in pretty heavily, I think exhaust is the weakest link. And then next, I might would go with water bending. I mean, even though I can come up with a flavor justification for it, if the perception is it doesn't make sense, then I think ultimately it's a little bit of a failure. I think they probably could have maybe found something a little bit better than that. But I think overall, like I genuinely like airbending and firebending, and I think earthbending is pretty solid too. Uh, completely intentional there, earthbending being solid. But yeah, thank you guys for coming and check out this video. We have done a lot of videos on this YouTube channel over the years, and it took me a while to sort of find like sort of like my footing and what my goals were with this channel, and working through that. But essentially, like I said, I make cards. I'm a card game designer. I love cards. think about them every single day. It's sort of my bread and butter. And so, if you'd like to stick around on this channel, like, comment, subscribe, and get more unique takes when it comes to card design from an artist, a writer, a game designer's perspective. I would appreciate it. And I do a lot with character design as well. I went to art school, and we have a lot going on here with that. So yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Be sure to jump into our Discord and let's talk some Magic the Gathering or Avatar Last Airbender, card games, and more. Take care and stay awesome.
Guess I have no choice. It's time to save the world.